Sukey Forbes knew her young daughter Charlotte had a rare genetic disorder. She knew she had to closely monitor Charlotte's health because a fever would prove fatal. But despite all of her best efforts, despite racing Charlotte to Newton-Wellesley Hospital, her 6-year-old daughter died suddenly 10 years ago yesterday. In her new book, The Angel in My Pocket, Forbes writes about her difficulty grieving, how her famous ancestry proved insightful, and how she found solace in a psychic. Forbes recently spoke about all of that with WGBH News arts editor Jared Bowden.
Sukey Forbes, The Angel in My Pocket, you discuss losing your daughter Charlotte when she was 6 years old, and it's just, you write about it so tenderly and beautifully. I read it all in one sitting. It was just so moving. One of the things that strikes me is when you lost your daughter so suddenly, you wondered where she went. And what was the question that you had?
Well, I very immediately had the maternal reaction of, where is she? Almost as if you've lost a child in a market or in a park. I had to know where she was, and I couldn't even allow myself to fall into the grief until I knew that she was okay. And I was raised with not a great architecture of a belief system, so I couldn't automatically assume that she was in heaven, whatever form that took. I had to know with a greater sense of understanding where all of that energy and all that was essentially Charlotte, where that had all gone.
And it's interesting that you were able to tap into your lineage, which is just extraordinary. Anybody here in Massachusetts knows your lineage. You're Forbes, a Saltonstall. Ralph Waldo Emerson is your great-great-great-grandfather. What was it about their beliefs, specifically Emerson, that allowed you to access what you needed to access that grief?
Well, I came to my affinity for Emerson sideways, although his belief of and self-reliance and the divinity in individuals and in nature was very much a through line in my upbringing. I came to him because I looked to my family history for any other clues as to how they dealt with loss. And he also had lost a 6-year-old child to a high fever. And through that loss, I dove in much more deeply to his writings and to his philosophy, because how could you not be deeply affected by that loss? And so I walked through much of my grief by reading some of his writings and trying to make what sense I could of them.
Well, it's so interesting because you follow the lineage down, and your parents and closer to your generation, you talk about the wasp behavior and the fierce aloofness that comes with that. No emotion, no raised voices. And you struggled. You questioned whether you were even grieving because you couldn't cry.
Right. Well, it both served me and hindered my process. Initially, that sort of puritanical, stiff upper lip, march boldly forward, that was very helpful initially because I had 2 other children that were very young and relying on me and on their father to be there. So initially it was very helpful to have that stoicism, but it very quickly became a real problem in descending into the grief because I was afraid that I would lose control and I'd fall into the abyss and I'd never come out. And there was great pride in holding oneself together, and grief, the full expression of grief requires really letting go, and it's not pretty and it's messy, and all of those things were in direct conflict with the way I was raised.
Which is a place you finally, thankfully, got to. But going back to your forebears and the spirituality and faith that you eventually explored, you began to seek out, or in some way it sounds like they found you as well, but even clairvoyance to help you be in touch with your daughter in another plane. How did that come to be?
Well, one of the key things that I experienced in grief, and I don't think it is unique to me, and I don't think it's unique to grief, I think it is unique to anyone who is suffering and struggling, is that pulling oneself out of that place requires equal parts looking inside of yourself for answers and equal parts looking out and trying on new ways of thinking and new ideas. And it was suggested to me by another bereaved parent that I might want to talk to a medium or a clairvoyant, these people who have extra data points or an ability to communicate with those on the other side. And I was hugely skeptical, but I was willing to be open-minded about it because I thought, why not? If somebody could put me in touch with my child, why wouldn't I try that? And when I did, the experience was hard to ignore. It was very conclusive to me that Charlotte was still very much present, and that gave me a great sense of comfort. That may not be the path for everyone. I think the path, again, is very much looking outside, but for me, I found great comfort and answers by doing that.
And you write about, I mean, it's chilling what you write about going out to Worcester, and you were skeptical. You didn't even use your own credit card. You paid in cash so that they would have no information about who you were and the level of detail they had about your daughter in the way that she was communicating to you. But I'm sure there are so many people who remain skeptical and probably think it's kind of crazy that you would do something like this. How do you reconcile that with what you felt initially and what your thoughts and what your husband's thoughts at the time were about this method of trying to process your grief?
Well, again, I think that one of the mind-opening experiences of grief is that you're willing to try on anything to find comfort or relief or answers. And so I was by nature more open-minded. I was, however, by my upbringing and by natural inclination, very skeptical. And so I proceeded very carefully down a lot of different paths, being open-minded, but always with an ear towards being taken advantage of or not appreciating or getting anything out of these experiences.
I just want to ask you quickly, it has been about 10 years since you lost Charlotte. Who is she to you now? She's kind of taken on a different relationship with you, it seems.
Yes, she's now more of an angel or a spirit guide. When I am looking for comfort or questions, I pray to her or I reach out to her almost as if I would to God. And I feel that she's there and she watches over and there's some sort of a relationship there. I feel heard and I look to her for guidance. It's
an incredibly moving story, The Angel in My Pocket, which refers to an angel that you found in her closet right after her death and that you kept with you for so long. Sukey Forbes, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.